This is my grandmother's backyard. This is literally where my radio career started. When I was a little kid, I used to sit back here and pretend I was on the radio. I don't know if you can see it anymore. The trees have grown up pretty good over these last 40 years, but there's a radio station right behind her yard. And I used to sit back here in my favorite apple tree or on the back porch, and I would play records. My grandmother gave me a little record player and a whole bunch of 45s, and I would sit and pretend that I was a radio DJ, that people could hear my voice all across the world. Now, I may not have been able to do that when I was 3 years old back in 1981. However, now, as an adult, things have gotten to the point where I actually can broadcast live from my grandmother's backyard and have it go all around the world via YouTube and a whole bunch of other channels, because now I can do worldwide video podcasts from anywhere.
So, how did we get here? How did we humans go from agrarian dirt farmers to worldwide content creators?
You do know this is my dreams coming true, right? This is a big deal. This is a big, let me run around. Ah!
I'll explain, sorta coherently, in this extremely meta video podcast about how we became video podcasters. And I can't afford a voiceover guy, so Reaching the Masses, a video podcast about how we became video podcasters.
Of course, everything really started with the printing press in 1440. Johannes Gutenberg put all those carpal tunnel monks out of work by inventing a way to mass distribute literature. Next thing you know, there are a bunch of writers creating great stories, or content, that kept the masses interested, buying, consuming, reading. Then you get Chaucer, Shakespeare, and eventually organized democratic governance. But hey, you're in a radio class. You know all this. The first rule of creating content is you've got to know your audience. Am I right, Dave? Let's skip forward to broadcasting, which is the distribution of content through electronic means. Samuel Morse started us off with Morse code in the 1830s, a system of dots and dashes sent through a telegraph over telegraph lines. Great for sending short messages, not so great for novels. Think of this as steampunk Twitter. Then, in 1881, Alexander Graham Bell figured out how to send voice over these lines by telephone, while a guy named Edison was inventing ways to record content on a phonograph. Before long, you've got Austrian Robert von Lieben, Heinrich Rudolf Hertz, Guglielmo Marconi, and maybe Lee DeForest figuring out how to make all of this wireless. And broadcast it to the masses. Broadcast. Then radio stations came about. Stations like KDKA in Pittsburgh opened up in 1920, but wait, what do we air? What content? Advertising came about because the guys that started radio figured out pretty quickly that broadcasting just to sell radios was a big bust. So then they put two and two together and figured out that if you could keep people listening longer, if you could engage them, then you can sell them more stuff. The first licensed broadcast in the United States was the election results of the 1920 presidential election between Warren G. Harding and a man named Cox. Then followed sporting events, debates, town hall meetings, and even the first talk radio programming with political talk pioneers like KFSG's Amy Semple McPherson and Father Charles Coughlin, whose ideas reached millions of parishioners, or listeners per week. As the money rolled in, radio transmitters became more and more powerful, to the point some stations could be heard clear across the country at night, and across the globe, internationally. If the station was powerful enough, we could go into AM and FM and all the regulatory agencies like the FCC, but again, you know all this, and this is about content creation. Am I right, Dave? All the earliest broadcasts were live, but there was the ability to play recordings as well, which brought music radio into the fray. While formats wouldn't be invented officially until the 1960s, the earliest DJs and programmers tended to play to their audiences. Radio programmers soon figured out everyone loves an old country late-night barn music hootenanny like the harvest festivals they have every year in their communities. And soon, stations like WLS in Chicago, whose owner Sears Roebuck & Company called themselves the world's largest store, were putting on musical concert shows like Barn Dance and broadcasting them every weekend to Sears catalog holders all across the country. They sold a whole lot of really cool kit houses and pants. Not to be outdone by a bunch of sausage-eating Yankees, the programmers at WSM in Nashville, the world capital of country music, created the Grand Ole Opry, which for decades broadcast live out of the Ryman Auditorium in downtown Nashville until it became big enough to have its own building and theme park, and is now the longest-running radio broadcast in U.S. history. After keeping people listening every week for nearly a century, they've sold a lot of advertising and a lot of records with that content. Radio dramas also became prevalent, like Orson Welles' presentation of War of the Worlds in 1939. Game shows like Truth or Consequences, and completely racist stuff we all knew and loved, like Amos and Andy, and other shows like My Favorite Husband, starring Lucille Ball. Yes, that Lucille Ball teamed up with her bandleader husband, Desi Arnaz, and jumped to the new medium television, where they took My Favorite Husband and turned it into I Love Lucy, one of the most beloved and successful episodic series of all time. In addition to basically creating the multi-camera live audience sitcom as we know it, they created Desilu Productions, which produced and fostered shows like The Andy Griffith Show and even Star Trek, basically shaping television content production and its business model for most of the rest of the 20th century. Of course, all the soap operas left radio for TV, as did the game shows, all the dramas, and most of the huge sponsors. Radio still kept on going though, solidifying the music angle, highlighting its best strengths, and creating radio formats. Listeners could now be targeted, reached, by corralling them into demographic groups around certain types of music. Top 40 was born when Todd Stores at KOWH in Omaha started compiling popular lists from local jukeboxes. Eventually, formats grew to include niches like classic rock, hot adult contemporary, and on and on. Also, with the advent of automation, radio stations didn't have to have a live DJ at all times, opening the door to syndicated programming like Casey Kasem in the weekly Top 40, or the voice trackers taking all our jobs. And of course, talk radio still rules the AM airwaves wherever people like to be angry. Of course, we left out a whole bunch about cable, which fought TV over advertisers and then regulations and control, with some of those cable companies growing into megacorps, which own all media, shrinking the media landscape to a small handful of about 6 ownership groups, which are humongous corporations. Dave? Boom, thunder. Internet kills the TV star. And then suddenly in the 1980s and 90s, we get the internet. And now content can be streamed all over the world. Content of all kinds, old TV productions, radio, music, anything you can digitize can be streamed all around the world to anyone with a computer. And suddenly, boom, you no longer need a TV station or a radio station to reach the masses. Everything changes. Streaming content is born. In the late 80s and into the early 90s, we see the origin of what we now call podcasts. Radio computing services had already started providing digital content to radio stations, and Multicast Network was utilized to distribute audio and video files. And then in 1993, Carl Malamud created Internet Talk Radio, the first computer radio talk show. Shows could also be downloaded on demand, so people could listen to shows anytime they want. One of the first of these was the Dan and Scott Show on AOL.com. Remember that? Then MP3s came along, and MP3 players. In the early 2000s, Apple came out with its iPod, allowing users to download and carry large amounts of content and listen to it anytime they pleased, on demand. As the internet progressed, so did streaming capabilities and video streaming capabilities. Fast forward to now, streaming content is king, especially podcasts and video podcasts. Shows like The Joe Rogan Experience, Mark Maron's WTF, and all kinds of sports shows and true crime dramas are attracting millions of viewers all over the world, as all the TV and cable services, and even the radio stations, have started streaming on the internet to compete with online-only streaming services like Amazon Prime, Netflix, Hulu, and Spotify. And advertisers have even more ways now to serve you by selling your data. It's like the best of both worlds, of being a consumer with more choices than you'd ever imagine, and being an involuntary multiple organ donor. Am I right, Dave? Okay, go easy on me. I'm you, remember? Put yourself in my shoes. Again. So that wraps it up. Now you can be Desilu. You can be your own Grand Ole Opry. You can be a great value Joe Rogan. The future of content creation and worldwide distribution is within you. All you need is a camera, an internet connection, and it's all literally in the palm of your hand. I'm Dave Stripling. Thanks for watching.